We are with State Representative Charlotte Mena from the 29th District. So in your committee, the State Government and Tribal Relations Committee, you see a lot of voting bills. And this year you had two, and then there was another one, and none of the voting bills passed the House. So let's talk about them. First, I want to ask you about your VRA 3.0 bill.
The Washington Voting Rights Act is a tool that we have for voters to bring a claim if their votes are being diluted. And what we mean by diluted is, say that you live in a city and you're all casting your votes, all 5 million of you are casting your votes for all the same city council members and the mayor. Well, what's happening is areas with high voting concentrations, more affluent areas with more resources, are voting in higher concentrations. And there may be folks who live in a different part of the community where people are voting less, they have less resources, and they may be voting for the same candidate, but their votes are being drowned out by the majority. And so one of the remedies that the WVRA calls for is district-based elections, so that we draw districts where there's communities of interest, people that have similar characteristics and vote in similar ways, so that people can elect leaders of their choice in each one of those areas. What the new WVRA bill would do is add another tool, not just for voter dilution, but this time for voter abridgment. And what we mean by abridgment is your ability to access the vote is diluted. It's impaired in some sort of way. So that could mean any number of things, from your ballot isn't coming to you in a language that you understand, your nearest ballot drop box is very far away from you. It could be a number of things, but it's really another facet of voting rights that we're looking at.
You had another bill about preclearance. So what is that?
Preclearance is a tool of the Voting Rights Act. The first time we saw preclearance was at the federal level in the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the way that you can think about your voting rights tools are in two ways. The WVRA, which we have here, and what we had at the federal level are the sword. And what we mean is, this is where you take action. This is where voting rights have been violated, and then you can get them remedied. Preclearance we consider the shield, and preclearance prevents voter dilution or voter abridgment from happening in the first place by asking jurisdictions, and in particular those that have had voting rights violations in the past, to have any electoral changes approved by the Office of the Attorney General. This had existed at the federal level pretty much without issue or controversy for 50 years until the formula that we use to identify those jurisdictions was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's because we were looking back at any sort of voting jurisdiction that had violations since 1965, and folks felt like that wasn't keeping pace with modern times. We have updated that formula in the state of Washington so that we can cover our cities, our counties, our school boards, our voting jurisdictions that may have had voting rights violations, and should have that extra level of review to ensure that we aren't inadvertently violating someone's voting rights when we make changes.
But there is also an economic advantage to this bill.
What we've heard from cities and counties is that when a voting rights case is brought, it is very costly. There may be litigation, there may be settlement dollars. This really should serve as an additional tool. We shouldn't have to go down that road. We should know upfront, by having review by the Office of the Attorney General or potentially by courts, to tell us, will this violate voting rights? Are we good to move ahead? And I think that should save us a lot of costs in the long term.
And then lastly, a bill that was not yours, I think it was Representative Dolio's bill. What does that one do?
So Representative Dolio had a bill to put some parameters around voter challenges. And what we've seen around the country, and even in Washington state in the last election cycle, is voter challenges by other voters who say, this person isn't registered to vote properly, or this person has moved, or this person may not live at this address. And while that's helpful in some cases, we're seeing batch challenges come in to the tune of hundreds, 300, 400, 500, and really questioning whether people should be on the rolls. What we want to prevent is people being inadvertently removed from the voter rolls, because it's difficult to get folks to register, it's difficult to get folks to vote once their ballots arrive, and we don't want any sort of groups in any sort of areas targeted. So this makes very key changes, such as saying that someone has to live in the same county as the person they're challenging, or that they have to know beyond a reasonable doubt that that person is no longer a voter. That way we make sure that we get the challenges that we can look into that may be legitimate, without overburdening the system, the auditors, and without getting anybody off the voter rolls that are rightly on there.
Now, there is there are rumors or people are saying or somebody heard that when people go and get their driver's license, for instance, they get automatically added to the register to vote, and they may or may not be U.S. citizens. Is there any truth to this?
There is not, and thank you for asking that question. So we do have what we call the motor voter law, which is automatic voter registration. So when a person that is eligible to vote goes to the DMV to get an enhanced driver's license, an enhanced driver's license requires proof of citizenship. So once someone has provided that information, the Department of Licensing will send it over to the Secretary of State's office for automatic registration. But they're not sending information over if someone is coming in for a standard driver's license, for example. So the myth going around that there is a gap and that there are non-citizens being registered to vote just simply doesn't bear out. There's no evidence of that. It doesn't exist. We are, again, as an agency, only sending information for folks that have provided proof of citizenship.
But there is another element. There is this misconception that people who are not citizens really want to vote for some reason.
I think that is a really big misconception. I know when I talk to folks in my district, which is a district with a lot of immigrants, a large population of folks from various countries in the world, they don't want to be mistakenly added to the rolls because they know that will be counted against them as they pursue whether permanent residency or citizenship status in the future. So it is it's something that we also want to honor. That community wants to be really careful to ensure that they remain on a path to citizenship or permanent residency. And I don't know where it comes from, but it doesn't really bear out when you talk to people.